This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Canada Reads American Style. This is Tara and I'm here with a very special guest, Merilyn Simonds. Welcome, Merilyn.
Thank you very much, Tara. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, I am so excited. Before we jump into book discussion, I'm going to read as I was telling Merilyn, she has an intense bio. Not intense is not the right word, but it's a good bio.
Long.
I condensed it down for us, but we're going to put the link in the show notes so that you can go and just see everything of Merilyn's career because it's impressive. So Merilyn was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba, spent her childhood in Brazil, and came of age in a small town in southwestern Ontario. She began as a freelance journalist, publishing 9 nonfiction books and scores of magazine articles on a wide range of subjects. Her book, The Convict Lover, was published in 1996, was nominated for the Governor General's Literary Award for Nonfiction, and is considered a classic in Canadian creative nonfiction. In 2017, Project Bookmark Canada erected a plaque in Kingston, Ontario to honor its place on Canada's literary landscape. That's impressive. That's very cool. Her biography, Woman Watching, Louise de Caroline Lawrence and the Songbirds of Pimsey Bay, was published in May 2022 and also happens to be one of my favorite nonfiction books. Her latest book, Walking with Beth, Conversations with My 100-Year-Old Friend, is now available wherever books are bought or borrowed. Merilyn lives with writer and translator Wayne Grady and divides her time between Kingston, Ontario and Mexico. Welcome.
Thank you.
That is condensed, but
I have been writing for. I published my first book in 1979, which is sort of the dark ages, and and I've published I think 22 books. So it's
wow.
It works out to one every 3 years or so, and here I still am.
Awesome. So let's jump in. Tell us about Beth, the book, and the effect of walking together on a friendship.
So Beth is Beth Robinson. She lives in Kingston, Ontario, as do I. And she is now 105. But when she turned 100, that year, I turned 70. So we're exactly 30 years apart. And 70 seemed to me like kind of a passage into a new territory that wasn't discussed very much. When I turned 20, I knew what that would look like. I knew it 30, 40, 50, but 70 seemed a bit different. And so I called up Beth, who had been living in this territory for 30 years, and said, let's get together. And she said, well, it's COVID. Let's go for a walk. She's much more thoughtful than I am. And so we put on our masks and we went for a walk, and it was a Wednesday. And Beth and I, when we get together, we just talk about everything. She's interested in everything. She reads widely. She's a writer. She produces art all the time. She's very thoughtful. And so our conversations are all over the place. And at the end of that walk, she said, well, let's do this again next Wednesday. And I said, absolutely. And so Wednesday at 3 started to be our time. And we would walk every Wednesday at 3 for, a kilometer or 2, maybe more, depending on what the day was like. And, well, there's something about walking, isn't there? I always said when I had kids and they were growing up, the best way to, especially teenagers, the best way to get them to talk was to go for a drive with them or to do dishes with them, some activity where you're both looking ahead and not, sort of sitting facing each other, which can be stultifying in a way to a conversation, right? So anyway, walking with Beth side by side, it was just so stimulating for our conversation. And every so often we'd stop in the middle of the street. I should say that the area around her house doesn't have sidewalks. So we were walking in the street, on the side of the street. So we'd walk, we'd stop in the street and we'd like pursue something. Yes, but what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And then we'd start walking again. So it was a very intense, wonderful interlude in my week. And I know it wasn't hers too, because it was COVID then, and there was a shutdown. And it was especially hard on older people, because they couldn't necessarily get out as much. They couldn't have people come because they were more vulnerable, to the virus, simply by the fact of being older, and your systems don't necessarily work as well as they did,
Mm-hmm.
when you were young. And different viruses attack different people. I remember, an earlier virus was particularly hard on young people, but this one was particularly hard on the latter years. So it was really important to both of us. And at some point, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but at some point we said, well, we should write this down. We were
Mm-hmm.
both taking notes. We're both writers. We're both, inveterate, note takers. And we said, this is so interesting, because we're talking about things that people of a certain age want to talk about. And um, we started making notes, and then at some point, the idea of a book started to generate. And so she gave me her notes. So when I left for Mexico, I don't know if you said that my husband and I live half the year in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So when we left for Mexico the following fall, I took her notes and my notes, and we continued having phone calls every Wednesday afternoon, but it wasn't the same as a walk. And gradually the pile of notes, built up and built up until it reached a tipping point. And we thought, okay, maybe this is a book.
Yeah. And a beautiful book.
Well, it's, one never knows exactly what one is going to do with a pile of material. And it's
Mm-hmm.
really the material that dictates the form. And so what I started doing early on was just writing up each of our conversations. And and then when I really sat down to look at it as a book, I thought, I don't want to do anything else. I just want these little conversations. So the book is made up of 75 really short
Yeah.
sections, 25 for sort of each of the 3 years that the book covers. And, you know, like conversations, the subjects come back. At one
Mm-hmm.
point we're talking about birthdays, and then later on we talk about birthdays again and again. And I love writing in these short passages that have an integrity to them on their own,
Yeah.
but then, become like beads on a necklace. Yeah.
Oh,
So,
that's a perfect description. Yeah. Because it has this flow to it as well. Like you said, each one is slightly there. Each one is its own thing, but it
mhm.
comes together beautifully, like just flows.
Well,
Yeah.
and a lot of people have told me, because I'm on tour now, so I'm meeting a lot of readers. They've told me that it feels like a walk.
Mm-hmm.
And one person, she's a journalist and she's used to living at a pretty fast pace. She said, reading this book, I started reading it the way I always read books, ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. But she said I wasn't very far into the book when I just started to, come down and settle into the book, and the pace of the book is tranquil.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, she really appreciated that. And of course, this is nothing that a writer does consciously, right? It's something that emerges out of whatever material you're working with, and I guess too out of the feeling that I have when I'm walking with Beth. And that's the feeling that naturally is imbued in the pieces of the book.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you. Because I found there is something about walking with female friends, and I can't just when I think about it, especially, so I'm 54. So, and I have found in the last couple of years that walking with friends has really expanded the friendships.
Yeah, I think it does. And I
Hmm.
think, another activity, cooking with friends does the same thing
Oh,
for me.
yeah.
Rather than just going out for coffee and sitting there and eating too much and drinking too much coffee, that and especially in a room full of other people, like in a
Hmm.
restaurant or a cafe, it doesn't have the same inclination towards depth
Yeah.
that doing an activity together does. And it reminds me of, the sewing circles that women used to have. And I lived in Greece for a little while, when I was in my 20s living on a beach. The little village near us was called Rothini. And in that village, the women in the evening, the women would all come out and sit on their doorsteps around the well in the center of the village, and they'd all be sewing and they'd all be chatting. And it's the same thing in Mexico where I live now, which feels quite a lot like Greece. The women will be sitting on their doorsteps, and they're called platicares. They're chatting friends. But they're doing something with their hands. They're doing
Yeah.
something with their bodies while they are while they're talking. They're not. What is it? I think it makes you more outward looking
Hmm.
and not so concerned with your own self. You talk about the other person. Anyway, however it works, Beth and I, our friendship really deepened along the
Yeah.
way.
In one of the essays called Imagine,
Hmm.
You share Beth's thoughts on the belief the role of imagination and creativity in our final decades. Want to share some words about that?
Yes. So Beth is an art therapist. She started out as a occupational therapist, uh, uh, working with veterans from the Second World War. And about midway in her career, she had such a strong interest in art that she moved into art therapy and worked until she was 99. And at that point, she was working with veterans from the war in Afghanistan who were suffering from PTSD. So she has a great belief in creativity as a I don't want to say as a therapy, because that's true, but that's not true for her as a person. No, that doesn't tell the whole story for her as a person. She believes in following your passions, and passions almost always involve imagination and creativity. And so she has a big dining room table that is covered with all kinds of bits and bobs, beads and Japanese papers and twigs and things she finds on her walks, and that friends have given her, odd shaped stones and wool and just all kinds of things. And she'll sit down there and she'll, you know, wait until something really intrigues her, and she'll take a bit of paper and a bit of a photograph and cut the paper into pieces and strew them across the photograph and do some creative thing. And what she finds, and what I find with writing, is that you move both out of yourself. I think you move out of your daily concerns, sort of out of your superficial self, and into a deeper part of yourself where there is such satisfaction and such joy. And, she makes these collages. She arranges pieces on these little, bits and bobs on these small pieces of plywood, and then takes it over beside her chair in the living room where she reads and looks at it and enjoys it for a while, and then takes it back and puts all the pieces back and then starts something new. So it's ephemeral art. She's not, there's not the kind of the burden of
Hmm.
creativity, right?
Yeah.
Of having to make something. But it is enormously creative. And in her imagination, she's always going deeper into herself as well as at the same time staying connected with the world. In other words, she doesn't descend into complaint or dark thoughts. She doesn't allow herself dark thoughts. If she starts to go there, she says, Beth, don't go there. And, and in our conversations, if we start, neither one of us is free of the usual, as yeah, as Aristotle would say, the usual decrepitudes of age. but you can either focus on those and feel crappy, or you can go somewhere else in your mind and heart. And I think for her, imagination and creativity are not only hugely satisfying on an artistic level, but they also allow her to be herself as she sees herself, instead of as an old woman on the
Yeah.
margins, which she
Yeah.
isn't.
Yeah. I really enjoyed this essay because I appreciated this practice of hers in the fact that it was just for the sake of making it, of creating
Yeah.
it, and not sharing it with the world necessarily, not selling it on Etsy, like, and then just at when she's finished with it, kind of not destroying it, but like moving on and reworking the
Dismantling it.
pieces,
Yeah.
dismantling. Yes, yes,
Yes. And I think what she is practicing is the purest artistic expression.
yeah,
It's the same with writing. And I do some mentoring, and I tell this to the people I'm mentoring who are, you know, new writers are always wondering, who's going to read this? Who's going to buy it? What'll I do with it? And I keep saying, no, that's a different conversation with yourself and the world. Do not even think about that while you're writing. While you're writing, your only relationship is with the story that you're trying to tell. And your only goal is to get that story on the page as purely and as perfectly as you can. All the rest of that stuff has to do with the world outside. And I think what Beth is doing is this, really, really pure artistic practice.
yeah. I know since reading that essay, I've been trying to figure out a way to work that into my like daily or weekly life of just sitting
Mhm.
down. I haven't found it yet. I keep working, things are going around in my head because I always get, I think, sabotaged by the thought that's, do I have to share it? Does it have to be perfect? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it
Yeah.
doesn't, she doesn't, she doesn't even she doesn't share it with me. I mean, if I happen to be in the house while she has something on the table, she'll show it to me, but it's not about other people. It's
Yeah.
about her. And I think actually this is a real, for me, is a really important thing to remember as I move forward through my life, is to do things that are nourishing for me,
Hmm.
that has nothing to do with anybody else. And especially for women who have spent their life, maybe raising children, maybe having partners, having jobs, we work really hard, and we work hard often pleasing or supporting other people in our lives. And when you get older, you have the privilege of exploring yourself. And I think that's an amazing thing.
Yeah. Okay. On that note, I would like to discuss an activity. So in the essay, The Story of Things, you
Yeah.
shared an activity that you and Beth have in common that you did not realize that you were both doing this. Yeah. Let's share that because I love this one as well.
So, kind of halfway through this walk, I contracted a condition called giant cell arteritis, and the treatment was horrible, and I was very, very, very ill. And so, I started thinking about my demise. And as part of that, I thought, what am I going to do? I have so many things in my life that I'm sure my kids and maybe my husband don't know the stories about, because they come from my grandparents, my great grandparents, my great great grandparents. And so I made a practice of taking pictures every day of a few things and then trying to write the story about those things. As a, and my intention, which I have not yet fulfilled, my intention is to, put it into a kind of a book so that
Mhm.
when I'm gone, the stories will still be there. And so I was telling Beth about this one day, and she kind of chuckled, and she said, "Well, open the drawer of the coffee table." And so I opened the drawer, and there was a manila envelope that said, "The story of the coffee table." So she had already been doing this, kind of making sure that all the things in her house had stories attached to them. And I just think that's lovely. And
Yeah.
I think it's a great thing to do, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It is, because sometimes when the things that are left behind, it's not the thing that has the importance. It's the story that is attached to it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have dismantled the household of my parents, my father, my husband's parents, my uncle, and an elderly friend. And, in all those cases, as I was sending things to Salvation Army and the mission stores, thinking, I don't even know
Mhm.
what I'm getting rid of, I and if I knew the story, maybe it wouldn't be so easy to dispatch things that, aesthetically didn't necessarily appeal to me.
Mhm. Yeah. Let's talk about the perpetual self, because
Mhm.
in Adios, you mentioned mourning the perpetual self. Can you explain what you mean by the perpetual self, and do you think we are aware of this perpetual self in our youth?
Can I read that little paragraph
Yes,
from
please.
Adios? Yeah, so Adios is the second time I'm leaving Beth to go back to Mexico. And I'm still very, very sick, and our departure is delayed as I wait to get self injection syringes so that I can continue my treatment in Mexico, where that particular medication is not available. So, so one of the paragraphs is this: illness has made me self absorbed. I can't stop thinking of all I've lost: my hair, my memory, my brain, the way it used to work, ideas flashing up, sparking off each other, priming the pump of my pen. And my energy, that boundless, bottomless sea I used to float in, reduced now to a slender vial that empties in minutes. I mourn my perpetual self, the sense I used to have that today I am the woman I was yesterday and will be tomorrow. And it's true when you're sick, and often, you know, I would say it's mostly when you're sick. It can happen that you wake up every morning to a different person. With this particular illness, that was me. Every day there was a new symptom. Every day there was, a change in medication. It was just, I just had felt I had nothing to hang on to. And I think, as you move through the later decades, that can be that can be an issue too. Your hair is a different color, your skin's a different texture, your body, either it puffs out with weight gain because you're not moving as much, or it reduces, and through muscle loss, so that you look in the mirror and you think, who is this person, right? And I think that what I've learned from Beth is that those exterior things are changing all the time, but that's not really your perpetual self. Your perpetual self is how you look out through that body to the world, and to yourself. My mother used to say, even just before she died, and she died at 75, she used to say, I still feel 18. It's always a shock looking in the mirror. And so Beth and I talked a bit about that. And Beth, at 104, which she was when I asked, 103, she was when I asked her this, she said, well, I still feel 74. And that was the year she was 74 when her husband died. And she felt at that stage, she moved into a new stage of life as a single woman. And yeah, so I think looking at hair and skin and all of that isn't the right way to see yourself if you want to feel happy and satisfied. Again, it's about developing and becoming aware of, getting to know your perpetual self. I mean, I'm happy to say I'm fine now and my energy's back and I can see again and I can walk again without falling over and all those things. So it's great. But I think the lesson that I learned in that whole thing was that those things are not me, you know.
Hmm.
It's me is how I feel and how I think, how I relate to the world.
Yeah. So my mom is in her 70s now, and her
Yeah.
sisters are in their 70s and 80s. And I've just kind of realized in the last couple of weeks, because a couple of them have had birthdays, that
Yeah.
in my head, they're not that age. Like, unless I think about them being 79 years old, they are not that age. Like, I look at them and I still see the women that raised me. It's like really beautiful.
That's really great. Yeah, I mean, I'm 76 now. My oldest sister is 82, and we're still the way we were as
Hmm.
teenagers, not as children, but I think well, maybe as young women.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you do kind of have an age where you know yourself, and that becomes your fixed point for the rest of your life. You still change and grow, and I think that's important. I mean, Beth is constantly open to new things. She's the most forward looking person I know. One of the sections in the book is called, oh, what did I call it? Oh, a madman drawing, something like that. And it's based on a wonderful book written by Emily Urquhart, Jane Urquhart's daughter, called The Age of Creativity.
Hmm.
And in that book, she talks about Hokusai, the Japanese artist who I think we all are familiar with his wonderful carvings of waves sort of coming up on the Japanese shore. And he said that nothing he had drawn before the age of 65 mattered. And at that point, he stopped calling himself Hokusai, and he started calling. Oh, I know what it was. He started calling himself a man mad about drawing. That's what it was. And he had plans. He said, at 100, I will start be doing something significant. And he had a vision for 30 years ahead of himself. And I said, and I turned to Beth, and Beth said, I do too. And she was
Yeah.
103 at that point.
Wow.
But she's very engaged in the present, and she's still forward looking. She's not doing what is such a temptation, which is looking back, which can
Yeah.
often be, oh dear, it wasn't like this when I was that age, right? Well, she
Hmm.
lived through Hitler. It was like that at her age. you know
Yeah.
she's lived long enough that she's going through the political and social cycles a second time, or third or fourth.
Yeah. Amazing. What do you want people to take away from reading your book?
Well, I don't have any prescriptions for takeaways. What I found over my career is that, and in myself, every person reads a book differently. One person wrote to me after, what book was that? The Holding came out, and she said, your book is full of fire imagery. And I thought, really? And I went, I went back and I read it, and she was right. It was full of fire imagery, but that wasn't something that I had intentionally put into the book.
Yeah.
So readers, there's an expression which I believe, which is a book isn't finished until it's read. So readers complete the process by bringing to the book their own lives and their own interests and their own needs and desires. And the only thing, I guess, my only thought about the book in that vein is that, I hope they get to know Beth a little.
Yeah.
I hope I hope the book introduces them to this person who's been so important to me, but I think is just has these wonderful attitudes about, moving into the later years. And she's very aware of ageism. I think ageism is the new sexism, the new racism. We dealt with language back in the 70s, language about women that was not, you know, it was inappropriate and degrading. And the same with language about people of color. But we still are full of language inside our own heads and out there in the world about older people that sort of belie our prejudices and our attitudes that need to change. And my friend, when she turned 75, she said, I just find my internal conversation has changed. I find myself saying, well, you're 75, you can't do that. Or you're 75, what do you expect? That's the internal conversation we need to stop. And I think Beth does not allow herself any of that. And I think through the book, people might, become aware of how they are aging themselves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah.
I love to end a conversation because I love an ever-growing TBR. So would you like to share some of your current reads or favorite books at the moment?
Well, yes, I really would, because I have read some really wonderful books lately.
Yeah.
Two that I would really recommend. One is Code Noir by Canisia Lubrin. That's Lubrin. That won the Carol Shields Prize in May. Which is the largest prize for women's literature in English in the world.
Yeah.
And it's just an amazing book, structurally and in terms of information. Code Noir is the sort of rules of behavior for Black people that was developed in, what was it, 17th century France, but has been adopted in every country that had slavery and is still part of our DNA. Fabulous book. The other one that came out at about the same time that I love is We the Kindling. And that is by Otonia Okot Bitek. That's Otonia, Otoniya, Okot, Okot, Bitek, Bitek. And she's a Ugandan Canadian writer. And that's the story of, we've all heard the story of boy soldiers in Africa, and Uganda especially. And this is the story of the young girls that were that were kidnapped and put to work for the army and in Uganda. And it is, you'd think that sounds like a really depressing and disturbing story, and parts of it are, but it is a story of resilience because she tells it from the point of view of the women who survived and are living their lives now with their own children. And it's again beautifully written. Both of these writers, Canisia and Otonia, both of them are poets, and it shows, it shows in their books. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Merilyn's book, Walking with Beth, is now available in libraries, bookstores. Run out, get it. Thank you, Merilyn, for joining us, for sharing your time, your words, and for sharing Beth with us.
Oh, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you, Tara. And thank you for what you do for books.
We try. If we can, I can't remember a time when I didn't read. And so that I get to do this as, extending my hobby of reading into talking with authors and with my friend Rebecca and sharing it with other people. It's pretty awesome.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, happy reading, everyone. Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen.
You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.